I remember the silence that night more vividly than the years of noise that had filled our home before it. The house stood still, emptied of the voices we once believed would always echo within those walls. The laughter of our children, the hurried footsteps on the stairs, the whispered arguments behind closed doors, everything had vanished, leaving behind an absence so heavy it pressed against my chest. It wasn't just a house left hollow. It was us. My wife Claire sat at the wooden table in the kitchen, her hands resting on the surface as if she was holding it steady. I could see her wedding ring glint faintly under the dim bulb above. That ring she had kept despite all the trials, the same ring she once slipped on with trembling joy decades earlier. Her eyes, though, were fixed on the letter lying open before her. That letter, creased, smudged at the corners, cruel in its bluntness, was the last thing our children gave us. Not their presence, not their voices, not their time, just words written without hesitation. We've decided to move on. We cannot take care of you. Please understand. Understand. As if that single word could erase decades of sacrifice. As if meals skipped, dreams postponed, nights spent working 2 jobs instead of sleeping, could be brushed away like dust on an old shelf. I stared at Claire's face, lined with years of devotion, and felt the sting of helplessness run through me. Our savings, siphoned in ways we barely comprehended, were gone. Our children, once the center of every choice, had left us stripped, with nothing but each other. I walked to the window. The night outside was colder than usual in Denver, the kind of chill that seeped into old bones, and reminded you that time was no longer a friend. The streetlights cast long shadows across the cracked pavement. It looked almost like the city itself had turned away from us. And yet in that silence, something stirred. It wasn't anger, not in the way people imagine. It was a determination that burned low, steady, and undeniable. We had been left with nothing, yes. But wasn't that also a kind of freedom? I turned back to Claire, who finally lifted her eyes to me, glistening yet resolute. She said only one sentence, but it was enough to ignite the path we would take. If they left us with ruins, then let's build something beautiful out of them. And at that moment, the ruins we carried inside began to whisper of a different possibility, one we had never dared to imagine. But neither of us knew how much that vow would cost, or how deeply it would reshape the rest of our lives. The morning after Claire spoke those words, the air in the house felt different, charged, almost restless. The letter still lay on the kitchen table, but instead of avoiding it, we stared at it as if it were a reminder of what we refused to become, abandoned victims of circumstance. We had no savings, no safety net. What we did have were our hands, worn but capable, and our will. Claire with her fragile joints and quiet resilience, and I with my weary back and fading strength. It didn't seem like enough, not in a world that thrives on youth and wealth. But it was all that remained to us. It was Claire who first mentioned the old plot of land. "Do you remember that property on the outskirts?" she asked, as she sipped her weak coffee, the cup trembling slightly in her hand. "The one no one cared for, with the crumbling barn?" I did remember. Years ago, when we used to drive through the countryside of Colorado, we passed it often. A forgotten corner of earth, littered with weeds and broken timber. I used to joke that even the birds avoided it. But as Claire spoke, I began to picture it differently, not as a ruin, but as a beginning. We drove out that very afternoon, our old truck rattling along the dusty road. The sky stretched wide and pale above us, the mountains in the distance dusted with early snow. When we pulled into the gravel shoulder by the property, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The place looked worse than I remembered. The barn had collapsed inward, its beams lying like broken bones across the ground. Rusted nails jutted out, threatening anyone who dared to step close. The earth was wild, covered in thorns and brambles that clung to our clothes. And yet, beneath the decay, there was space. Wide, open, waiting space. Claire walked ahead of me, her scarf fluttering in the wind. She stopped by what had once been a porch, now nothing more than uneven stones and shattered wood. Slowly, she bent down and picked up a small object from the ground. It was a rusted key, heavy, ancient, its teeth worn but still intact. She turned it in her hand as if it were a relic, her eyes soft with something I couldn't name. "Maybe," she whispered, "this is a sign. A key that still exists, even when the door is gone." I didn't know if she meant it as hope or irony, but as she held it out to me, I felt its weight press into my palm, strangely grounding. That night, we returned to our empty house in Denver with dust in our hair and dirt under our fingernails. Yet for the first time in months, our hearts carried something else too. A vision. It wasn't much, and it certainly wasn't clear, but it was enough to make us sit at the table again, lean close under the single bulb, and whisper plans into the silence. We didn't yet know that this forgotten land, with its ruins and rusted key, would soon become the stage for the most painful and the most miraculous chapter of our lives. When Claire and I first married, we never thought of wealth or property. Our dream was simple: raise a family, give them what we never had, and leave behind a legacy of love. That was enough for us, at least in the beginning. I worked as a mechanic in a small shop on the south side of Denver, the kind of place where grease lived under your nails no matter how hard you scrubbed. Claire worked as a schoolteacher, pouring patience and tenderness into children who weren't her own. At night, we'd sit together on our narrow porch, eating canned soup and laughing at the way life had placed us in a neighborhood where dreams always seemed one paycheck away from collapsing. But when the children came, first Daniel, then Sarah, and finally Emily, everything shifted. The world became about them, their futures, their comfort. I remember Daniel's first baseball glove, Sarah's violin lessons, Emily's endless pile of books. We couldn't afford it, not really, but we found ways. Extra shifts, skipped meals, winters where the heat barely worked. Claire once pawned the only bracelet her mother had left her, just so Sarah could join the school orchestra. We told ourselves it was worth it. Every sacrifice, every empty wallet, every moment of exhaustion. We believed our children would see the love behind it all, that one day when they were grown, they would carry that love forward, perhaps back toward us when our bodies were too tired to keep moving. And for a time it seemed like they did. They hugged us tightly on Christmas mornings, drew us shaky crayon portraits with best mom and best dad scribbled across the top. They said they loved us, and we believed them, because what else could love look like? But time has a way of testing bonds. As they grew, distance slipped between us. College took them to other states. Jobs kept them busy. Holidays grew shorter, visits less frequent. And when they did come, they carried a restlessness we didn't understand, as though our modest home embarrassed them, as though our love was a burden too heavy to acknowledge. I tried not to see it. I clung to the small gestures, Emily calling on my birthday, Sarah sending Claire a card, Daniel fixing a loose hinge during one visit. But underneath, Claire and I both felt it. Something fraying, something shifting, and then the money. Investments Daniel convinced us to make. "Just a small contribution, Dad," he had said, his smile polished, his tone confident. Sarah and Emily agreed. "It's secure. You'll be part of something bigger. You won't regret it." We signed papers without understanding them fully, trusting the children we had raised, trusting that love meant safety. But love, it seemed, had been replaced by calculation. The accounts drained quietly, steadily, until we woke one morning with nothing but bills we couldn't pay. When we asked for help, for explanation, all we received were cold words and excuses. And then, the letter. I still wonder, did they send it together, sitting side by side or alone, each one washing their hands of us separately? Whatever the case, the message was the same. We are done with you. It was betrayal carved deep into bone. And yet even then, even in the bitterness of it, I could not stop remembering the small children they once were, the trust in their eyes, the way they used to reach for my hand. That contradiction, that ache, never left me. It followed me to the ruins. It followed me into every decision we made from then on. Because when you have given everything to someone, how do you stop loving them, even when they no longer love you back? I often find myself drifting back to the early evenings when our children were small, when life felt like a fragile kind of paradise. Claire would hum while she cooked, her voice soft enough to blend with the hiss of the pan. I'd come home from the shop, my hands black with oil, and Sarah would meet me at the door, her violin tucked under her arm, eager to play a song she had just learned. Daniel, the eldest, always tried to act older than he was. He'd sit at the table with his homework spread out, scribbling furiously, frowning as if the weight of the world rested on his young shoulders. Emily, our youngest, would crawl into my lap, a book far too advanced for her years, clutched in her little hands. "Read with me, Daddy," she would insist, her wide eyes glowing in the lamplight. The house wasn't big. The walls carried every sound, every laugh, every argument. But to us, it felt full, overflowing even. I can still recall the scent of fresh bread Claire would bake on weekends, the way the children would fight for the end pieces, tearing them apart with butter melting down their fingers. And yet, hidden in those golden memories were shadows I refused to see at the time. Daniel's ambition often turned sharp. He wanted more than what we could give. "Other kids have better sneakers, Dad," he once snapped when I brought him a pair from the discount store. I told myself it was teenage frustration, nothing more. But I noticed the way he looked at me, like I was already failing him. Sarah's music, though beautiful, became another wound. She wanted a better violin, one we couldn't afford. Claire sold that bracelet, her mother's last gift, so Sarah could have the instrument she dreamed of. Sarah's gratitude was real, I think, but short-lived. Soon she wanted lessons we couldn't pay for, trips we couldn't fund, and Emily, sweet Emily, who loved us so fiercely when she was young, began to close herself off during high school. She buried herself in books, in plans for universities far away. She still hugged me, still called me Daddy in a whisper that made my heart ache, but her eyes already looked toward another life, one that didn't include us. I told myself this was normal. Children grow, children change, parents are supposed to let go. But what I didn't realize was how easily letting go can turn into being forgotten. Even then, there were signs. Missed family dinners, phone calls unanswered, long silences in conversations. Claire noticed them more than I did. She'd sit awake at night staring at the ceiling, whispering, "Do you think they're slipping away from us?" And I, stubborn and blind, would answer, "No, they're just busy, they'll come back. They always come back." But they didn't. Those cracks widened with each passing year until finally the whole foundation gave way. And when the foundation of a family collapses, you find yourself standing in ruins long before you realize you're there. The last time we all sat together around the dining table was a summer evening, 3 years before the letter arrived. I remember it with a kind of painful clarity, like watching the last sunlight fade before a long night. Claire had gone to great lengths that day. She roasted chicken, baked her apple pie from scratch, set the table with the china we only used for special occasions. She wanted it to feel like old times, as if a perfect meal could somehow stitch together the threads that were already fraying. Daniel arrived late, his phone glued to his hand. He had a new suit on, far sharper than anything I had ever worn, and he kept checking his watch as though the minutes spent with us were costing him something. Sarah came with a violin case but never opened it, too busy talking about a concert she had attended in New York. Emily, still in college then, was quieter. She smiled politely, but her eyes were distant, as if her mind was already on the train that would take her back east the next morning. We tried. God knows we tried. Claire asked about their lives, their dreams. I cracked old jokes, hoping to draw out their laughter. For a fleeting moment when Sarah complimented the pie, and Emily leaned her head briefly against Claire's shoulder, I almost believed things were as they used to be. But then the conversation turned to money. Daniel leaned back, his voice smooth, rehearsed. "Mom, Dad, there's an opportunity, an investment in a real estate group. It's practically guaranteed." I remember the way Claire's fork froze in her hand. She looked at him with the same expression she used when he was little and asked for something far beyond our reach, half proud of his ambition, half wounded by the demand. Sarah chimed in quickly. "He's right. It's safe, and it could finally give you some security. You deserve it." Emily, hesitant, nodded. "It might help. At least, you won't have to worry." Their words felt rehearsed, coordinated, like a play we hadn't been invited to until the final act. And though every instinct in me screamed caution, I couldn't bring myself to doubt them. After all, hadn't we given everything to build their futures? Wasn't this perhaps them giving something back? So we agreed. We signed the papers. We trusted. That night after they left, Claire stood in the doorway holding her empty pie dish, staring into the quiet house. "Did you see the way they looked at us?" she whispered. I wanted to say no. I wanted to believe the warmth I had imagined at the table was real, but I had seen it too, that flicker in their eyes, that distance that had nothing to do with geography. They looked at us not as parents to be cherished, but as obligations to be managed. It was the last dinner we shared as a family. From that point forward, visits became rare, phone calls shorter. The investment drained our accounts without explanation, and when we reached out, pleading for answers, for help, all we received was silence. Until finally, silence turned into that single letter. By the time Claire folded it back into its envelope, the truth had settled like a stone inside me. We were no longer a part of their lives. We had been cut out, left behind, emptied. And yet, in that emptiness, a new kind of fire began to stir, one that would carry us far from the house where they abandoned us, to the broken land where we would begin again. The first morning we returned to the property with the intention of beginning our work. The sun hung low over the fields, casting a pale gold across the jagged beams of the collapsed barn. It was beautiful, in a way only ruin can be, tragic and alive at once. I carried an old hammer, its wooden handle worn smooth from decades in the shop, and Claire had packed sandwiches wrapped in brown paper. We stood side by side at the edge of the broken porch, staring at what lay before us. "This is madness," I muttered under my breath. "Maybe," Claire replied softly, "but sometimes madness is the only way forward." We began with our hands, pulling weeds that clawed through the earth like stubborn veins. Every thorn scraped against our skin, every stone dug into our palms. By noon our bodies already screamed in protest. My back tightened, forcing me to stop every few minutes, while Claire's knees buckled more than once. Still, we worked. The barn was the worst. The old beams, rotted and sharp, seemed to mock us. I swung the hammer against them, each strike sending shocks up my arms, until finally one beam gave way and collapsed into dust. The sound echoed across the empty land like a gunshot. For a moment I felt almost triumphant, until I looked at the acres still undone. By evening we were covered in dirt, our muscles trembling, our breath shallow. Claire sat on a fallen log, her scarf pulled tight around her head, her face pale. She smiled faintly, though, as if the pain itself was proof of life. I sat beside her, staring at the horizon. The mountains in the distance looked endless, untouchable. The silence pressed in, heavier than the labor had been. For the first time since the letter, I let myself wonder if we had made a mistake. What if this place swallowed us whole? What if all we built was another kind of emptiness? Claire reached into her pocket then and pulled out the rusted key she had found on our first visit. She pressed it into my hand. "Do you feel it?" she whispered. "It's heavy, because it still matters. Even when the lock is gone, the key is still a promise." I turned the key over in my hand, feeling its cold bite against my skin. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe this ruined place could become something more than just a monument to our abandonment. But the night crept in quickly, swallowing the land in shadows. As we packed our tools and made our way back to the truck, the sound of coyotes echoed in the distance. It was a reminder, the land was not ours yet. It would resist us, test us, perhaps even break us. And in that moment, for the first time, I felt fear. Not of losing our children, we had already lost them, but of losing ourselves in the struggle ahead. Within weeks, the weight of our decision began to show. The land demanded more from us than our bodies could give, and every day revealed a new obstacle. The roof beams of the old barn refused to move, no matter how many times I struck at them. Claire's hands, delicate from years of teaching, blistered and bled as she dug into the earth with a rusted shovel we had borrowed from a neighbor. By nightfall, she could barely close her fingers. I watched her try to hold a teacup one evening, the porcelain trembling so violently I had to steady it in her hands. Finances pressed in like a vice. The little money we had left, enough for groceries, gas, and not much else, was vanishing fast. We bought nails and wood in small quantities, stretching every dollar until the bills blurred in my vision. The thought of failure gnawed at me. What would happen when the money ran out? Would we be left stranded here, halfway between ruins and hope? And then came the sickness. One morning Claire woke, coughing, her face pale, her lips dry. She brushed it off, saying it was nothing, but the cough deepened as the days passed. Each sound rattled through the walls of the old farmhouse we were trying to make livable, echoing like a cruel reminder of her fragility. I begged her to see a doctor, but she refused. "We can't afford it," she whispered. "Besides, I'm not leaving this place now." Her stubbornness frightened me as much as her cough. She had always been strong in spirit, but her body was weakening faster than I could admit. At night, when she finally drifted into uneasy sleep, I would sit awake by the window, staring at the ruins outside. The beams lay scattered in the moonlight, looking more like gravestones than building materials. I wondered if I was asking too much of her, of us. The thought pressed harder. What if I lose her here? What if this dream swallows her before it blooms? One evening, as the sun dipped low and the air grew heavy, I snapped. I threw the hammer across the yard, the metal clanging against a stone. My voice cracked as I shouted into the emptiness, "We can't do this, Claire. We're too old. We're too tired. This land will kill us before it saves us." Claire, weak as she was, walked to where the hammer had fallen. She bent, coughing, and picked it up with trembling hands. Slowly, she placed it back into mine. Her eyes, watery and tired, held mine with a quiet fire. "Then we will die building, but we will not die abandoned." Her words pierced me, leaving me both terrified and strangely steadied, because in that moment I understood. This was no longer just about survival. It was about dignity, about reclaiming what our children had taken. But as I held the hammer again, its weight heavier than before, a darker thought whispered in the back of my mind. Dignity might come at a cost neither of us could pay. It took us nearly a month to clear the first corner of the land. We hauled out broken beams, burned what couldn't be salvaged, and carved paths through weeds taller than our shoulders. Our bodies ached, our clothes were torn. But when I stood there one morning, looking at a small square of earth finally free from ruin, I felt something stir inside me. "We did this," Claire whispered beside me, her breath shallow, her cough still lingering. She knelt down and pressed her hand into the soil, her fingers sinking into the dark earth. "This ground is alive. It's still waiting for us." That day we planted the first seeds, wildflowers and vegetables we had bought from a local farmer's market. Nothing fancy, nothing certain, but a beginning. I remember the smell of the fresh soil, the weight of the watering can, the way Claire's face lit up as if she were looking not at bare dirt, but at a future. For a brief moment, hope felt solid, like something I could hold in my hands. But hope, I would learn, is fragile. A storm rolled in 2 nights later. The sky turned black with clouds, and the wind howled across the fields with a force that rattled our old truck. Rain lashed the ground, pounding the fragile soil where our seeds lay hidden. The barn, still broken but partially propped with makeshift supports, groaned under the assault of the storm. I sat at the window, gripping Claire's hand as thunder split the night. Every crash felt like a reminder of how small we were against the elements. She whispered prayers under her breath, clutching the rusted key in her palm as if it could somehow unlock mercy. When the storm passed, we stepped outside at dawn. The garden was gone. The soil had washed away in streams of mud, carrying our seeds into the gullies. The supports on the barn had collapsed, snapping in two. All the work we had done, the weeks of back-breaking labor, lay shattered at our feet. I sank to my knees in the mud, the taste of rain still bitter on my tongue. My chest burned with a mix of rage and despair. "We can't fight this, Claire. Not storms, not age, not everything stacked against us. We'll lose. We'll always lose." She knelt beside me, her hands covered in mud, her face pale but steady. "No," she said, her voice hoarse. "We only lose if we stop." But as she said it, she coughed so violently that her body shook, her hand slipping from mine into the dirt. I caught her, holding her close, my heart pounding with fear. The ruins could be rebuilt, the soil could be replanted, but what if I lost her before any of it mattered? The storm outside had passed, but another storm, silent, relentless, was rising inside me. And I knew even then that the greatest battle ahead would not be with the land, but with time itself. The storm had stripped more from us than just the garden. It took something inside me too, something steady I had been clinging to. In the days that followed, I moved slower, worked less, my hammer striking with half its former strength. I tried to hide it from Claire, but she noticed. She always noticed. "You can't give up now," she whispered one night, her voice thin but insistent. "Not after everything." I wanted to answer, but the words sat heavy in my throat. And then the visitors came. It was a Saturday morning, the sun still low when we heard the crunch of tires on the gravel road. No one ever came out this far, not unless they had reason. I stepped out onto the broken porch, squinting as a silver car pulled up, too polished for this forgotten land. The doors opened, and my heart lurched. Daniel. Behind him, Sarah stepped out, her hair tied back, her clothes sharp and pristine. Emily wasn't there. For a long moment, none of us spoke. They stood by their car, their eyes sweeping over the ruins, the mud, the broken beams. Daniel adjusted his jacket. Sarah crossed her arms. Finally, Daniel called out, "Dad, what are you doing here?" The question wasn't curious. It was accusatory, as if we had trespassed on a place we didn't belong. I felt my fists tighten, but Claire's hand touched mine gently. She stepped forward first, her voice calm. "We're building something new." Sarah's laugh was soft but sharp, like glass breaking. "Here. This place is worthless. You should be in assisted living, not this." The words stung deeper than I expected, not just because of the insult, but because of the casualness, the way she spoke as if our lives, our choices had already been written off. Daniel looked at me then, his expression hard. "Dad, you shouldn't be wasting your time. You're not capable of this anymore. You're going to hurt yourself or Mom." The irony nearly choked me. Hurt ourselves, as if their betrayal hadn't already cut deeper than any broken beam could. I stepped forward, my voice unsteady but firm. "We are not wasting our time. This land may be broken, but so are we, and we're rebuilding piece by piece." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You don't understand. You don't know everything." There was something in his tone, an edge, a secret pressed down too long. Claire noticed it too. She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. "Then explain it, Daniel. What is it that we don't know?" For the first time, his polished confidence cracked. He looked away, his shoulders stiff. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, her lips pressed into a thin line. The silence stretched, heavy and tense, until Claire spoke again, her voice trembling but resolute. "You took everything from us. If there's more, if there's something else, we deserve to know." Daniel's eyes flicked back to mine then, and in them I saw a flash of something I hadn't expected. Shame. "I didn't just lose the money," he said finally, his voice low. I gambled it. Every cent. It wasn't an investment. It was a lie." The words hung in the air, heavier than the storm that had torn our land apart. Claire gasped, her hand flying to her chest. My vision blurred as though the earth itself had shifted beneath me. And for the first time, I realized that the ruins we were building upon weren't just in the land. They were inside our family, rotting deeper than I had dared to believe. The silence after Daniel's words was unbearable. The wind moved across the field, rustling the weeds, as if nature itself had paused to listen. Claire's face had gone pale, her lips pressed tight, her hand trembling against her scarf. I stepped closer to my son, the boy I once held in my arms, the man who now stood before me as a stranger. "You lied to us," I whispered, my voice raw. "You took everything we had, not just the money, Daniel, but our trust. Do you even understand what you've done?" His jaw clenched. He wouldn't meet my eyes. For the first time in his life, Daniel looked small to me. Not because of his stature, but because of the weight of his choices pressing down on him. Claire's voice broke the silence. "Why, Daniel? Why gamble with what we gave you, with what we needed to survive? His answer was quiet, almost a confession to himself, because I thought I could win. I thought I could fix everything, make enough for all of us. But I lost control, and when it was gone, I didn't know how to face you. The words might have carried remorse, but they did not heal. They cut deeper, reopening wounds that had never been allowed to scar. Before I could speak, Sarah's voice cut through, sharp and brittle. Stop pretending this was just Daniel's mistake. We turned to her, startled. She stood rigid, her arms folded across her chest, her eyes burning with something between anger and shame. "What are you saying?" Claire asked, her voice barely audible. Sarah's eyes flickered to mine, then away. "I knew about the gambling. I knew months before you lost everything, Daniel told me. He begged me not to say anything, and I kept the secret." Claire's knees buckled, and I caught her before she fell. Her body shook in my arms, her breath shallow. "You knew," she whispered. "And you let it happen?" Sarah's face crumpled. For the first time in years, she looked like a child again, ashamed and desperate. "I thought he'd turn it around. I thought if I said nothing, it would go away. I didn't want to choose between him and you." My chest burned, fury and grief colliding. "You chose silence, and silence betrayed us." The words left my mouth harsher than I intended, but I didn't pull them back. They were true. The air between us thickened, heavy with unspoken years of disappointment. Daniel looked at the ground, Sarah at the horizon, neither able to face the devastation in Claire's eyes. Finally, Claire spoke again, her voice weak but steady. "You left us with nothing, not just money, not just support, but honesty. And now you come here and expect us to do what, forget?" Neither of them answered. The only sound was the wind, whistling through the broken beams of the barn, as if carrying the ghosts of our family's past. I tightened my grip on Claire, feeling how light she had grown, how fragile. I wanted to shout, to demand more answers, but the words died in my throat. Because in that moment I realized something chilling. The ruins we stood among were not just physical. They were the ruins of a family we had once believed unbreakable. And yet... Claire's hand squeezed mine, weak but insistent. Her silence spoke louder than any words. We would not collapse alongside these ruins, not now, not yet. But the cost of standing would only grow heavier from here. The tension crackled like fire between us. Daniel stood stiff, his hands buried in his pockets, his shoulders hunched under the weight of his own confession. Sarah kept pacing, her shoes grinding against the gravel, her face red with a mixture of anger and guilt. Claire sat beside me on the broken step, her breathing shallow, her eyes hollow. Finally I spoke, my voice low but steady. "You both left us to starve. You drained us, abandoned us, and now you stand here, speaking of secrets as if they explain anything. But where is Emily?" The question landed like a stone dropped into water, sending ripples through the air. Daniel looked at Sarah, Sarah at Daniel, neither willing to speak first. "Where is she?" I demanded, louder this time. It was Sarah who finally broke. Her arms dropped to her sides, her gaze fixed on the weeds at her feet. "She couldn't come. She didn't want to face you." Claire's head lifted slowly, confusion clouding her features. "Didn't want to face us? Why?" Daniel's sigh was heavy, ragged. "Because she was the one who convinced us to write the letter." The words struck harder than any storm, harder than any hammer blow. Claire's body trembled beside me, and for a moment I thought her heart might give out. "No," she whispered. "Not Emily. She was the one who loved us." Sarah's voice cracked as she spoke, her hands twisting together. "She thought it would be kinder. She said cutting ties cleanly was better than letting things drag on. She didn't want you to rely on us anymore." I felt something inside me tear. Emily, the child who used to curl against my chest, who begged me to read to her even when she could already read every word herself. Emily, whose goodnight hugs once lingered long enough to make me believe love could outlast everything. She had been the one to finish the betrayal. I stood, my legs unsteady, my fists clenched at my sides. My voice shook with rage I could no longer contain. You speak of kindness? You call abandonment mercy? You, all of you, stripped us of everything we were, everything we gave you. And now you stand here, not even with apologies, but with excuses. Daniel flinched. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. But none of it mattered. Their words, their faces, it was too late. Beside me, Claire rose too, though her body swayed. She lifted her chin, her voice fragile but sharp as glass. If Emily believed that leaving us was mercy, then she never knew love at all. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Daniel reached into his pocket then, pulling something out, a folded piece of paper, creased and worn. He held it out toward me with trembling hands. She did write something, he said, his voice low. For you. But she couldn't bring herself to send it. The paper hung between us, fragile as a bird's wing, carrying with it the weight of every unanswered question. My hand shook as I reached for it, unsure if opening it would heal or destroy me further. And in that suspended moment I realized, sometimes the greatest ruins aren't the ones we build upon, but the words we never meant to read. The paper shook in my hand as though it carried its own pulse. Claire leaned against me, her frail fingers digging into my arm, whispering, "Read it. I need to hear her words." With a breath that scraped against my lungs, I unfolded the letter. The ink was smudged in places, as if written in haste or in tears. "Mum, Dad, I know this will hurt, but please believe me when I say I am doing this out of love. You've given us everything, and I fear that if you keep giving, there will be nothing left of you. Daniel, Sarah, and I, we cannot carry you. We don't know how. You deserve more than being dragged down by our failures. If we cut the ties now, maybe you'll find strength to live differently, without us leaning on you. Please forgive me, even if I don't deserve it. Emily." The words blurred before my eyes. My hands clenched so tightly around the paper that it nearly tore. Claire's sob broke the silence. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, shattering, the sound of a heart giving way. She pressed her face into her hands, her shoulders trembling. "She called it love," she whispered, her voice breaking. "She called abandonment love." I could not speak. I stared at the letter, at the handwriting I knew as well as my own. I remembered teaching Emily to form her first letters at the kitchen table, her little fingers gripping the pencil with determination. And now those same letters, once innocent, once full of trust, were the knife twisting into us. Daniel spoke, his voice unsteady. "She believed it, Dad. She thought it was better this way." I snapped my gaze toward him, my rage finally boiling over. "Better? You call this better? To rip parents from their children's lives? To take and take until there is nothing left and then leave us to rot? If this is love, then what is cruelty?" Daniel flinched, his face pale. Sarah turned away, unable to meet my eyes. But the damage was already done. Claire's body sagged against me, exhausted by the weight of it all. Her eyes, once fiery even in despair, now looked hollow as though Emily's words had stolen something vital from her. I folded the letter carefully, too carefully, as though preserving the wound it had carved. I slipped it into my pocket, knowing it would haunt me for the rest of my days. That night, Claire and I lay in the ruined farmhouse, the wind seeping through the cracks in the walls. She clutched the rusted key in her palm as if it might anchor her to life. I held her, but even as I whispered that we still had each other, a question gnawed at me, cruel and relentless. Was love ever real if it ends this way? The ruins outside felt no heavier than the ruins inside my chest, and though the night stretched endlessly, I knew that when morning came the letter would still be there, an unmovable stone in the fragile garden of our hearts. The days after reading Emily's letter blurred together, heavy as lead. Claire moved more slowly, her cough deepening, her strength fading with each sunrise. She still tried to work beside me, pulling weeds, stacking stones, but her body betrayed her more than the land ever had. One morning, I found her sitting in the half-cleared field, her hands resting limply in her lap, her face turned to the sky. "I can't feel my strength anymore," she whispered when I knelt beside her. It's as if every breath takes something from me, instead of giving it. I wanted to carry her inside to force her to rest, but she resisted. She pointed to the dirt around us, the patches of earth where tiny shoots had begun to sprout again despite the storm. "If the ground can keep trying," she said, her voice trembling, "then so can I." But I saw the truth. Her body was fragile, her skin almost translucent, her heartbeat weak against my hand when I held hers at night. And I knew the cost of rebuilding might not be measured only in sweat, but in her very life. The letter haunted us. Claire would touch her pocket often, as if she expected Emily's words to change if she read them again. But they never did. "Please forgive me, even if I don't deserve it." That line became a knife. She turned against herself, whispering in the dark, "Maybe she's right. Maybe we made them too dependent. Maybe we loved the wrong way." I couldn't bear it. "No, Claire," I told her, gripping her shoulders firmly. "We did what parents do. We gave. We sacrificed. Love is not wrong just because they twisted it." But even as I said it, my voice cracked, because part of me wondered too. Had we raised them in a way that made them believe our lives were disposable? That cutting ties was a mercy instead of a cruelty? One night, as she drifted into a fevered sleep, Claire pressed the rusted key into my hand. Her eyes half closed, her voice barely a whisper. She said, "If I don't wake tomorrow, promise me you'll finish this. Promise me the ruins won't stay ruins." I held her against me, my tears falling into her hair. "Don't speak like that. You'll wake. You have to." But as the night stretched on, her breathing shallow and uneven, the fear became unbearable. The thought of losing her, the only person left who still held me as her world, was more terrifying than any storm, any ruin, any betrayal. I sat awake until dawn, the key heavy in my palm, the letter heavier still in my pocket. Between them lay the choice that would define the rest of my life, to surrender to the ruins, or to keep building even if it cost everything I had left. And when Claire stirred weakly beside me, whispering my name, I realized the truth I had been avoiding. The ruins we were fighting against weren't just wood and stone. They were inside us, in the grief, the betrayal, the exhaustion. And if we couldn't rise above them soon, they would consume us whole. When I look back now, I understand that the ruins we rebuilt were never meant to be just a home or a garden. They were a mirror, a reflection of what life leaves us with when everything else is stripped away. The land was merciless. The storms came, the soil resisted, and our bodies ached more than they healed. And yet, from that struggle, beauty still rose. Flowers bloomed in soil we thought was barren. Birds began to return, their songs weaving into the silence that once crushed us. Slowly, the place no longer looked like abandonment. It looked like life beginning again. Claire weakened, yes. Her body bent under the years and the labor, but in her eyes, I saw something stronger than flesh. I saw defiance, dignity. Even on the nights when fever burned her skin, she whispered prayers of gratitude, not for what we had lost, but for what we had created with our own hands. And me? I discovered a truth I had never wanted to face. Forgiveness is not something we offer because others deserve it. It is something we give because carrying hatred is too heavy a burden for the heart. Daniel's lie, Sarah's silence, Emily's letter, they cut us deeper than any wound I had ever known. I don't excuse them. I don't pretend the betrayal did not shape me, but I refuse to let it end me. Claire once told me, holding the rusted key in her fragile hand, "Even when the lock is gone, the key still matters." I didn't understand then. Now I do. The key was never meant to open a door outside of us. It was meant to unlock the strength within us. I cannot say I have forgiven completely. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not a single act, but a slow rebuilding, stone by stone, like the land itself. Some days I wake with bitterness clinging to me like ash. But other days I feel light enough to remember that my children, for all their failings, were once small, innocent, and full of love. And perhaps somewhere, deep within them, that love still lingers. What we built from the ruins is not just a place. It is proof. that dignity can be restored, that even when abandoned we are not empty, that the truest inheritance is not money or comfort or even loyalty, but the courage to stand when everything around us falls. And if my children ever return, if they ever find the strength to face me, I will be here. Not in ruins, not defeated, but standing in the garden we built with nothing but our hands, our pain, and our love. Because sometimes the greatest paradise is not the one we inherit, but the one we carve out of brokenness. The land looks different now. Where once there were broken beams and choking weeds, there are rows of flowers swaying in the breeze, a modest house standing steady against the horizon, and a garden that feeds more than our bodies. It feeds our hope. Claire sits on the porch most mornings, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes soft as she watches the sunlight spill across the fields. Her cough still lingers, her strength is not what it once was, but her smile, quiet, radiant, is stronger than any storm. Sometimes she holds the rusted key in her hand, turning it slowly, as if it were a reminder of all we have endured. The letter from Emily rests in a drawer inside. I do not read it often, but I no longer hide from it. It reminds me of what we lost, yes, but also of what we chose to become afterward. For if betrayal left us with ruins, forgiveness, slow, imperfect, unfinished, helped us build a paradise. Our children may never return. They may never ask forgiveness. And yet, I have chosen to live as though forgiveness is already possible, because otherwise the ruins will always remain inside me. This land, this garden, this fragile home we built from nothing, it is more than survival. It is a testimony that even when your own blood abandons you, dignity can be rebuilt, that love, though scarred, can still find ways to bloom. I stand at the edge of the field now, the wind against my face, the earth steady beneath my feet. The ruins did not destroy us. They became the soil where something new could grow. And if one day my children stand before me again, I will not meet them with anger. I will place the rusted key in their hands and let them decide what to unlock. Because we were left with nothing, and from nothing we built everything. And that, I whisper to myself, is the miracle of ruins.